Great. So thanks all for joining us today. First Tech Talk of 2025. If we haven't connected yet, my name's Abby. Work with the Longwood Collective. Been here about 3.5, almost 4 months now. So excited to continue these Tech Talks in the Sustainability Committee moving forward. Joining us today, we have Kate England. She's the Director of Grid Infrastructure at the City of Boston, and going to talk to us about the EPA's Residual Designation Authority as it pertains to stormwater discharges, what those of us in the Longwood area need to know, how we should be thinking about the next few years in terms of existing lots and new developments as we kind of look ahead into the future. From this, hopefully you all will have kind of a better sense of how to think about this. The draft permit is open for public comments through March 17th. So Longwood Collective will be submitting comments. So urge you all to let us know if you have anything that you would like us to include in that. We're happy to put that together ahead of the deadline. So from here on out, I'll let Kate start sharing. We'll make sure that there's time for Q&A at the end as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Appreciate the introduction. And I also have a Q&A time as well. So should be great. So thanks everybody for having me. My name is Kate England. I'm the Director of the Office of Green Infrastructure for the City of Boston. My background is in engineering and landscape architecture with a specific focus on stormwater management. And it's an interesting time in stormwater in Boston right now. So we've got a couple of new permit things that are happening, some that will apply directly to the City of Boston that we will then kind of create stormwater ordinances and pass on to our larger properties. But today we're going to talk about the EPA's Residual Designation Authority permits that are, as Abby mentioned, currently out for public comment, and what that will mean for properties in the Longwood medical area specifically that have over an acre of impervious cover, which is many of you. So I've got a brief agenda. So I'm going to do like a really quick introduction to stormwater and green infrastructure just to like level set. I know a lot of people on this call are probably familiar with both of these things, but just want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And then we'll talk a little bit about the RDA permits, what they are, what it will mean, and then some of the specific areas that EPA has requested comments. There's some things that are probably very specific or very important to this part of the city, and then there are others maybe that will be less, applicable, and we'll talk about that when we get there. And then there's obviously the opportunity to submit freeform questions and comments, and then I've got some Q&A time, and then just a quick note about a flood survey that the City of Boston is conducting and information that would be useful from Longwood. Okay, so really quickly, I'm just going to do an intro to stormwater and green infrastructure. So what is stormwater? We are all operating within an urban area, which means that we have got a lot of hard surface around us. We have buildings, we have sidewalks and roadways and other things that are hard and don't allow water to pass through. So when it rains or sleets or snows or wintry mixes or whatever we're getting in Boston, on these hard surfaces, that water isn't able to absorb into the ground. And so it must be collected by catch basins and drains in the roadway and then piped underground. What's the problem with that? So I like to talk to people a little bit about stormwater as a resource, but in this case, especially with this kind of lens on permitting here, we're going to talk a little bit about why managing stormwater is important. So there's water quality and water quantity. So in cities, we have a number of pollutants that build up on our hard surfaces, whether it's roofs or roadways or sidewalks. When it rains or precipitates in any way, all of those pollutants get washed into our storm drain system, and all of that goes directly to receiving waters. So that's rivers, lakes, streams, Boston Harbor, all of our nearby water bodies. Common misconception, it does not go to the wastewater treatment plant. There are only a few parts of the city left where the sewer system and the stormwater system is still combined, which means that the majority of the stormwater in the city of Boston is going directly to water bodies without any treatment. And then the quantity issue is that our storm drain systems are sized for a certain type of storm, a certain size of storm. To give you an indication, our system is sized to manage about 5 inches of rain over the course of 24 hours. In the last couple of years, we've received multiple storms that have dropped 2 inches of rain in an hour. And so our system is just undersized and not able to manage the volume of stormwater that we're now seeing, and these storms are becoming more frequent and more intense. The map that you're seeing on the screen is pulled from one of the Climate Ready Boston viewers. It shows our 10-year, 24-hour flood projection. So this teal that you're seeing on the screen shows flooding across the city. As you can see, this is in all neighborhoods. We anticipate that this is going to affect us all, and many of these neighborhoods are already seeing this flooding. So the city is using green infrastructure to help manage some of these quality and quantity issues. So for the purposes of just kind of general understanding, green infrastructure uses plants and soils and other natural materials to capture water and allow it to absorb back into the ground. As water is absorbing into the ground, pollutants are being removed, and it's also reducing the amount of water that has to go into our storm drain system, which means that our system can drain more across the city when we have green infrastructure kind of sprinkled throughout the city. A couple of different types of green infrastructure that you may or may not have heard of. So we have bioswales and rain gardens, which are just kind of shallow, depressed areas that water can collect and then absorb into the ground, typically planted with native plants. We have tree pits and tree trenches, which are large subsurface storage areas, meaning underground. There's a good amount of space where we're allowing water to hang out until it can get back into the ground. And they're typically planted with trees, which means trees can uptake that water as well, which is great for all of our urban trees, which often struggle to get water. Constructed wetlands are exactly what they sound like. They're human-made, and they're meant to imitate the function of a natural wetland. And then over time, they do actually become wetlands. And then green roofs, which Longwood actually has many of these, are vegetation and vegetated systems that are on roofs and terraces and other parts of our, kind of vertical built infrastructure that absorbs water, cools, and does a variety of other things. So green infrastructure also has all these wonderful co-benefits. I won't read them all, but just, beyond just managing stormwater, which, is kind of the primary function of green infrastructure, it also, increases, biodiversity in our cities. It helps to reduce temperature in the city, can be used to improve safety in our neighborhoods. It helps with addressing environmental justice issues, providing access to nature, and addressing food security issues. So there's a whole kind of host of additional things that green infrastructure is doing in addition to just capturing stormwater, reducing flooding, and getting water back into the ground in a cleaner way. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the RDA and what is going on right now. So years ago, back in the 70s, the Clean Water Act was passed. The Clean Water Act gave the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, a number of powers and authorities to regulate municipalities, property owners, and others to allow the, these regulatory bodies to clean and improve the quality of water in the United States. So this, I guess about a year or two ago, EPA announced that they would be using their Residual Designation Authority under the Clean Water Act to start to regulate individual property owners in a way that they had not done in the past. So typically, a stormwater permit is given to a municipality, or it's given to like a large industrial property that is producing a lot of pollution or a lot of stormwater, or it's issued during construction, as a way to protect water from pollutants that are common during construction, sediment that washes off of sites, and a variety of other things. But EPA now is using this additional authority in the Clean Water Act to regulate commercial, industrial, and institutional properties with 1 acre of impervious cover or more. And what that means is 1 acre of roof and sidewalk, parking lot, walking path, any kind of hard surface that water cannot pass through. All of those surfaces on your property are added together, and if you have more than 1 acre on your property, you will be receiving an RDA permit. The work is happening specifically within the Charles River, Mystic River, and Neponset River watershed. So that's not just Boston, it's, watershed wide. So I think there are 70 plus municipalities that are being affected by this. And property owners across those municipalities will all be receiving permits. So just so that everybody's aware, Longwood is largely it's within the Charles River watershed. You drain to the Muddy River drains to the Charles. And so this entire kind of section of the city is covered under this new permit action. And permittees will be required to manage stormwater and reduce pollutant loading to impaired water bodies. The Muddy River is actually one of the most impaired water bodies in the city of Boston, and the Charles River is also an impaired water body. And so in the past, I mentioned that there had been permits that were given during construction activities. So if you were doing a redevelopment or development of some kind, you would have, to adhere to specific water quality requirements. But the compliance that we're talking about with the RDA permit is a perpetual ongoing permit that is required regardless of whether you're doing development or redevelopment. It's just your parcel as it is going to have to comply with these regulations. So what is a NPDES permit? Because technically you're going to be receiving a NPDES permit. So a NPDES permit is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. I'm going to share all these slides too, by the way, so I don't feel like you have to read every word on them. You'll have this information. But what these permits do, these NPDES permits do, is they regulate stormwater and discharges to local water bodies. And the intent is to help protect water quality. The NPDES permit typically limits the amount of pollutants that we can discharge from our sites. And this is calculated by a land use table, essentially, that exists within normal permits. And I'll get to that in a minute. But EPA will look at your site and see what kinds of surfaces you have and calculate how much pollution is coming off of your site and going into water bodies. They require monitoring and reporting of the discharging that you're doing. So there's a new kind of component to the work that you'll have to do that's a monitoring program. It often includes other conditions to make sure that your discharge doesn't harm water. So pollutants can be harmful. Temperature can be harmful. So if water coming off of your site is particularly warm, it can be harmful to receiving water. Water moving very quickly can be harmful, and water in large volumes can be very harmful. So there are different things that the permits could potentially regulate beyond just pollution. So it could be volume, temperature, amount, speed, all these different things could be part of your permit requirements. And then there's also each permit is tailored to your specific parcel. We don't know to what extent that's going to be true. I think most, like hospitals, for example, would probably receive very similar permits to one another. But in the kind of before this new RDA, permits were very specifically written for each individual permit holder. And so we don't know to what extent that's going to be true with this new action. So just a couple of notes. In Massachusetts, the Environmental Protection Agency and Mass DEP, Mass Department of Environmental Protection, co-issue permits. Massachusetts is what is called a designated state. We're actually unusual across the rest of the United States in that EPA is still our primary regulator. So in most other states, the State Department of Environmental Protection is the primary regulator for water. But here it's EPA with support from Mass DEP. And then also the permitting authority, which in this case is Mass DEP with support, or EPA with support from Mass DEP, will issue a permit for a specific time period. And so currently it's not to exceed 5 years. So each permit that we receive will last for about 5 years, and then there'll be a revision to the permit after 5 years. And so what will this mean for everybody? Well, property owners are going to be required to manage stormwater in a way that they haven't been in the past. I think a good first step that most property owners who are subject to this new permit will undertake is to do an assessment of your current facility and your current activities. How are you managing stormwater right now? Do you have a storm drain system, on your property? Do you have an infiltration system on your property? Do you have green infrastructure? Looking at the different kind of requirements that are within the permit that you're receiving, and then putting together a stormwater management program plans. It's called a SWIP or SWIMP. And that will include how you're planning to report back to EPA about how you're managing stormwater and how you're reducing your pollution contributions. So just so everybody knows, NPDES permits vary by state because most states have their own authority to write these permits. Because EPA is largely writing ours, we have some idea of what it's going to look like, and they typically include the following 5 elements. Some of them are very high level, like a cover page, but the cover page essentially is going to describe, your discharge and what you're supposed to do. You are going to have effluent limits, which means the amount of water and pollution you're allowed to discharge from your site. You're going to have monitoring requirements and reporting requirements. It's going to be very specific about how often and in what form you have to communicate with EPA about what you're doing. And then there's special conditions. So if your site, has a specific pollutant that it's, dealing with, or is particularly large and contributing large volumes of stormwater, they may tell you the types of best management practices that you need to put in place, or any additional activities that you need to be conducting. And then lastly, there's the kind of standard conditions, which everybody gets the same standard conditions. So it's administrative and procedural and all that kind of stuff. So actually, I'm going to pause there really quickly. I realize I probably should put a question and answer slide there. Any immediate questions from people? I'm going to jump through. Yes, Sue, I'll let you up just one second. I'm going to jump through after this. We're going to talk through some of the things that EPA is specifically requesting comment on. So if you want to talk through the RDA and NIPDs specifically, we should pause and do that now. Sue, go ahead.
I just wondered if you could give us an idea of the overall timeline when this, when the review period's over, when this might be implemented, and how much time institutions would have to come up with these plans.
Yep. So one of the things that EPA is requesting comment on is the timeline. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. No, it's a great question. But currently permit questions and comments are due on March 17th, which is about a month and a half from now. Actually, a little bit less than that. It's about a month from now. So after March 17th, EPA, with support from Mass DEP, will review all the comments they received, and that's probably going to take them a couple months. And so we, as a regulated area, probably won't hear anything from EPA until probably the summer, is my guess, maybe early summer. And by that point, they will have revisions to the draft permit language, and it will probably depend on how many people submit comments, whether there will be any final conversation about the comment of the permit or the content of the permit. But my assumption would be we won't hear back from them for several months, so early this summer. And then currently they're proposing, and this is true of municipal NIPD's permits as well, there's a phasing in process. So typically the regulated entity, whether it's a municipality or in this case a property, will receive your permit, and then you will have, a year to assess your facilities, to put a plan in place. And then you'll have, another couple of years to physically implement the things that you planned to do. And your monitoring requirements, for example, might start, right away. But the actual physical construction and changes that would need to be made to your site, usually you have several years to make those. And based on what they're currently proposing, it looks like they are looking at a phased-in approach right now. My guess is that the majority of the watershed associations and environmental groups and others are going to indicate that the current timeline proposed is too long, which I think we'll get there in a minute, but actual individual property owners may have different opinions about that. So it's important to respond to that particular request for comment with, what this would mean for your properties, for properties in Longwood generally, and how much time you think you would need realistically to start making changes. Yeah.
And, that prevailing wage thing we did this morning?
Yeah.
What was that for again? Was it door openers?
EV.
EV.
Ready to come?
No, not yet. I was trying to remember what it was. Because I'm getting old. No, we didn't get them yet. I did another one too.
I think it's pretty common and the city is going to do this because we're about to get a NIPD's permit as well, to hire a consulting firm to do the assessment, to help assemble the plan, just because most of them, many stormwater compliance consulting firms have many municipal and industrial clients already. And so they're doing, this exact permit compliance work. So if, the Longwood Collective, for example, would rather not try to figure out how to do all of this work yourselves. There are many, kind of professionals in the Boston area who do this with regularity. So at least, you may even want to start chatting with folks. Just there are a couple of resources that came out with the draft permit, including a viewer that you can kind of poke through and see, whether or not your property is included, but also just, get a sense of, the properties around you that might be included, everything, within Longwood Collective, for example, you could see how many of the properties are going to be, potentially captured under these permits. So there are some good resources that came out with this draft permit. So I would recommend folks poke through them. I'm happy to send a follow-up email after this chat, just kind of like, here are the things that you should consider. I also have a draft memo format that we've shared with other entities that are going to be submitting permit comments as well. And it has a bunch of links at the bottom, things that might be helpful. So I'll attach that document to, it has the headings that EPA is requesting questions on, and then like additional questions and comments space at the bottom, and then all the links that you'd need. So even if you don't end up using it for your comment letter, you can still use it for like information and like stuff you want to respond to. All right, other questions about the Residual Designation Authority action specifically? Things I didn't put in the slide. So Massachusetts is not the only place where this is happening. Los Angeles is also having a similar action taken, where, commercial, industrial, and institutional properties within LA, and I believe the suburbs of LA, whatever the suburbs of Metro LA looks like. I'm assuming it's massive, but that area, that watershed is undergoing the same process that we are. They're also experiencing some legal challenge, which is based on how stormwater is currently managed in LA. There haven't been any legal challenges yet in Massachusetts, and we've known that this is coming for several years. So I would assume that this is probably going to move forward without a court case. So just if you're interested in learning more and seeing how others are responding to this, you can look into what's happening out in LA right now. And then I know that, like I said, there's many, many people, 70 plus municipalities in Massachusetts that are being affected by, this action and are within the Charles River, Mystic River, and Neponset River watersheds. Okay, I'm going to jump into the specific areas EPA is requesting comments on, and then I'll kind of candidly chat through additional things that the city will probably be commenting on. Okay, so there are 6 specific questions that EPA has asked. This is probably not super relevant, just because I know that there's not as much housing in Longwood, but maybe, relevant for universities and others that might be coded in a certain way. But anyway, so multifamily housing and tax codes. EPA is wondering whether or not they should include multifamily residential properties in the final designation. The general feeling from people that I have heard so far is that large residential, meaning dormitories, housing developments, and other things, will likely be included. So I just wanted to flag for everybody that that will probably be part of the permitting, exercise. But there's the fact sheet. I've also tagged the specific section in the fact sheet that this particular topic is talked about, and I'll link the fact sheet to you all in that email that I sent as well, if you want to learn more about the question and the specifics. The second one is the compliance schedule. So EPA is currently seeking comment on the compliance schedule. So currently they're proposing between 7 and 9 years to achieve 50% progress. And what that means is you'll have 14 years, up to 14 years to get to full 65% load reduction. And basically what this means is there are existing TMDLs, which are total maximum daily loads for the Charles River, for the Neponset River, and the Mystic River. Those reports, those documents, specifically outline the amount of pollution that particular water body can receive without or before it becomes impaired. So we are all going to be required to reduce our pollutant loading to less than the percentage, in this case, 65% for the Charles River, in order to achieve the water quality benefits that EPA is looking for. So In the first like 7 to 9 years, you'll be looking for about 32% load reduction. So keeping about 32% of your pollutants out of the Charles River. And then after 14 years, you'd be looking for, 65% of your pollutants should not be getting into the Charles River. So what I've heard from others, including watershed associations, municipalities, and others, is that the 7 to 9 years feels long to everybody. Feels like it might be more time than we should be allowing. So it's very likely that their EPA probably started with a higher number and was looking for the community to ask for a lower number. And so I just want to flag for you all that it's very likely that that will come up in a lot of people's comments that, typically a municipality is given 5 years to get to the 65% reduction. And so for an individual property to be given 14 years is going to feel very long to a lot of people. All right, so there's 2 questions. Oops, I don't know why that keeps happening. There's 2 questions that are about neighboring properties that are adjacent to each other. So the first one is properties that are all owned by the same property owner, but don't physically touch. Should the owner be responsible for managing a permit for each individual property? Which means that I'm going to keep using universities just because it's easy, but a university, for example, that owns 15 to 20 buildings could have 20 individual permits. And so option 1 and option 2 that you're seeing on this slide, option 1 is separate NOIs and separate permits for each site. And then the second option is just one NOI, notice of intent. Sorry, I should have spelled out that acronym. And one permit for each property owner. So if your properties don't touch each other, you're still submitting just one request and getting just one permit. Yeah, go ahead. And I realize, please do throw up your hands and ask questions as we go.
In either event, are we looking at 1 acre total or each property that's at least 1 acre of impervious?
So for this one, it's each individual property has 1 acre of impervious surface. The next question, which is the other one that I mentioned about contiguous parcels, is about a property owner who owns 2 parcels that are next to each other that collectively add up to 1 acre. Meaning the property line is imaginary. And as far as stormwater is concerned and pollutant loading is concerned, that property boundary doesn't really mean anything. And so basically they want comment here. I'll click to it now. They want comment on, I guess it's the 5th item, but they want people's thoughts about whether or not they should be amalgamating adjacent parcels. The 4th item that they're looking at is owner operator. So EPA is wondering, because typically your permit is going to go to the owner of the property, meaning if you own it, but somebody else leases it and cares for it and is responsible for everything that happens on that property, you as the owner are still receiving the permit and have all of the permit requirements. So EPA wants people's thoughts about assigning the permit to a lessee or to a tenant because they're the entity that is going to be doing the street sweeping and the management of, the green infrastructure and the stormwater system. And so the example that they gave is a shopping plaza with 1 owner, but many tenants that manage things in different ways. And then this is the one about contiguous parcels. So if you are 1 property owner and you own 3 adjacent properties that collectively add up to 1 acre or more, is that in your best interest to consolidate to the greatest extent possible, which will also reduce your number of individual permits? And so, again, EPA is looking for people's thoughts and comments about this. Again, environmental advocates and watershed associations and others will very likely be saying that, yes, we do want this, this kind of amalgamation of properties, because if you're an individual property owner, your property boundary is kind of an imaginary thing. But they're also open to hearing from individual property owners that they would like to keep them separate and thus potentially reduce the number of parcels that you have to manage. And then the last one is historic properties, which is an interesting one. At least from a stormwater compliance perspective, I think it's interesting. So EPA is looking for people's thoughts and comments about how to handle historic properties. So stormwater management often means digging up properties and putting in pipes and structures and, bioretention and like planted areas and other things, which can affect a historic property. And, the historic nature of that property and its current layout and site and materials and other things. And so EPA has proposed a couple of potential options here, which is, essentially every property would be required to submit that they meet one of these three criterion. Either it's not a historic property, everything's fine, or it is a historic property, and we don't think that discharges and adding stormwater management will affect the historic property. Or 3, we are a historic property, and we do think that adding stormwater management will hurt our property. So EPA is looking for general comment on that. And I assume that there's probably some historic properties within Longwood. And so just wanted to make sure that you all had seen this one as well. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause, and we can back up to any of these that is of interest. But thoughts, comments about any of these 6 things that EPA has specifically asked for comments on?
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
And sorry for not having, read the technical guidance, but is contiguous considered to be across a right of way for a street as well as, like adjacent on the same side of a street, or, is that the kind of thing that's open for exploration?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that they want comment on.
Okay.
Because right of way, it depends on whether it's a public right of way or a driveway that serves as a right of way, for example. So they're going to want it, meaning if you are, if there's a private way that is owned by, a homeowners association or owned by a collective, and it bisects a property, does that count as 2 separate properties or is that just one? Whereas a roadway, a publicly owned roadway that has a storm drain system, it could be argued that that really does bisect your parcel and that the stormwater management in the roadway really does functionally make it 2 different properties. So they're looking for people's feedback about how this could positively or negatively affect, improve stormwater management, and just people have high-level thoughts one way or the other.
And then my second question was about the historic properties question, because that comes up for us time and again. And so I guess I would be curious if you have any insights about, what the implications are of selecting criterion C in terms of like whether that gets you some kind of abatement or anything like that. And if it doesn't, if your obligations under the permit remain the same, I think that's the type of thing that we would start to be looking to the city for, support in figuring out how to deal with that in terms of the Landmarks Commission and other people who have oversight over those types of structures.
Yeah, that is a great question. And EPA has proposed some potential solutions to avoid physical impacts to historic properties with genuine concerns about damaging or kind of altering the historic nature of the property. They're proposing the opportunity to invest in off-site stormwater management. They are proposing mitigation. For example, you could, one of your other properties that you own, you could potentially do more stormwater management there as opposed to on the historic site. So there's a couple of different like relief valves that are currently proposed. And I'll highlight some of those in the fact sheet when I send it over, just so that you guys can all read them. And then from what happens if there's nothing to be done and it's historic and it is going to affect my property, and how do we deal with that from the city and permitting perspective? That's part of this. The city is going to be making some comments about the administrative burden that this is going to put on the city and other municipalities too, not just City of Boston, and looking for support from EPA about, maybe there should be some kind of, set of common rules across all, affected municipalities so that we can all manage this in the same way. We don't want to draw, potential ire from a property owner for managing it one way in one municipality and another way in a different municipality. And another thing that came up during, they did some focus groups when they, kind of were initially drafting the draft permit. And one of the things that came up in the municipal focus group was we have property owners who own properties across municipalities. And what if a property is in one municipality that is regulated, is within the watershed, and another property or another part of their property is outside of the regulated area? Are we going to create undue burden on the outside of the regulated area because everyone's going to try to do work in an area that they don't have to, follow these strict rules? So it was an interesting conversation, and the kind of, I think the takeaway that EPA had at the end of that was that there are some genuine concerns from the municipalities who are going to have to administer this. And so I know that we did request resources and support and other things. So I'm hoping that, that some of that will go into the actual content of the permit itself. And then some of it will be just things that are put in place by Mass DEP, EPA, and others. We'll see exactly how that turns out, but we did flag that during the conversations.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions? I'm going to click back really quickly just to remind everybody. Okay, so residential multifamily housing, any thoughts or comments on that one? Again, you should submit your own comment letter and everything, but just want to make sure people are having a chance to ask questions if they have them. Okay. The rollout schedule, again, I'm sure that that Longwood Collective's comments will probably differ from the city's comments, although I think the city will probably support a slightly more lenient timeline, knowing that a lot of properties that are going to be captured under this new permit have not planned to do any renovations or developments or redevelopments. This is, some of them are properties that were either developed or redeveloped recently and were not captured under, this new permit. Some of them are parcels and properties that maybe don't need to be redeveloped. And so there's a good amount of, this was a project or a parcel that we had not planned to touch for a while, and now we have to do something with it. And so I think that there, at least from the city side, there's a desire to make sure that the property owners have time, resources, things that they need to make this, to meet their permit requirements, so that it doesn't become, this massive burden that, is excessively problematic. We do know that because it's affecting properties across so many different municipalities, we're not as concerned with, people relocating to other municipalities, which is, something that comes up sometimes. We assume that because the requirements are the same across the whole watershed, there's probably minimal, risk there. But I do know that the city will be looking into resources and support and other things for property owners to try to ensure that, anything that's contained within this permit, and any new things that will be required, that we're giving the support that we can. So I know that that's a lot of, information, I guess, but it's definitely something that, municipalities have had NIPD's permits for years, industrial properties have had them for years, and so we do have some good precedent to look to. Okay, jumping ahead to the next one. Non-contiguous properties, do you want lots of individual permits or one big one? Any high-level thoughts on that one? Pros and cons of either? Pros might be if you have a bunch of smaller ones that your requirements could be more lenient. Cons would obviously be the reverse of that, one large permit might make your impact look larger. Pros for having them all amalgamated would be that it's just less administrative work. All right, jumping ahead. So looking at whether or not the owner or the tenant or lessee should be the recipient of the permit. I really, I think through this one, because I'm sure that there are some situations within Longwood where owners and operators are different, and what that might mean for Longwood. And you can submit opposing opinions on that. EPA and others actually like just thought coming through in comments. So if you're like, we like this because, we don't like this because, they'd like to hear both. And then the contiguous properties, do we want those all squished together into one? Okay. So there's one more, sorry, I lied. And then the historic properties, which we talked a little bit about. So I'm going to pause for a couple of like just general things that the city is going to be commenting on, just to give you all a sense of, of what's going on there. So I mentioned administrative burden. We'd like to make sure that this is something that we can administer effectively here in the city, and that our property owners are not experiencing unnecessarily difficult processes. As you know, Boston Water and Sewer put a stormwater fee in place in April of this last year. And how will this permit potentially affect that stormwater fee? Currently, all properties are assessed a stormwater fee because all properties benefit from stormwater management conducted by Boston Water and Sewer and the city of Boston. If you are a property owner who now has their own stormwater permit, what does that mean for your fee? Because, in theory, your property is now contributing less to stormwater management needs. One of the things that did come up in the municipal focus group was that even if a property is managing their stormwater, they still benefit from stormwater management in the right of way, for example. The ability to get to and from your parcel matters. And so most municipalities that have stormwater fees, at least during the focus group, indicated that they didn't foresee exempting properties that had these NPDES permits, but maybe having a discount of some kind because you are contributing so much more to stormwater management than you were before. So that will probably come up. And that's another area where municipalities, I think in general, are going to ask for EPA or somebody to have like a standard approach to that across all municipalities, so it doesn't become too confusing across different municipalities. The question of maintenance came up, which I thought was a good one. There's a watershed in Maine. It's called the Long Creek Watershed, and they have had a collective NPDES permit that affected multiple towns, specifically property owners within the watershed, for probably 15 or so years now. It's been a while. And so that is a nice analog to what's about to happen here. And what Long Creek Watershed opted to do is all of the property owners bought in together and have a collective maintenance program that does stormwater maintenance on all of their properties. So for example, Longwood Collective or others in similar positions could have a regional, like group that you put together where you are grouping your maintenance, which I think is something that's worth considering and worth talking about. And it came up during the municipal session that it would be nice if those could be run by, watershed associations or other existing, environmental groups that property owners could just be part of, so that, individual property owners wouldn't have to administer, but they could still benefit from it. Other things that came up during that session, the discussion about how pollutant loading was going to be determined came up quite a bit. So typically when you get a permit, your actual pollution contribution is determined by a table that shows land use type and amount of pollutant loading from that type of land. It's not perfect. For example, green space is very, very different. So a golf course, for example, exports much, much more pollution than the Arnold Arboretum, for example. Golf courses use a lot of fertilizers and other things to keep the grass green. They have a lot of herbicides and pesticides and things that get used, whereas, a more natural kind of sanctuary space, like a natural park has less of that. And so the question did come up, is there room for property owners to push back against their pollutant loading? And so I think that there will be an appeal process or some process for that, whether it's run through the city of Boston or through EPA, we don't know. But that did come up. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but any questions or anything about any of those items before I jump into just one last ask for you all, or just general questions? I'm happy to answer any questions you all have. And we're also here to support as well. I'll send over some resources and other things that might be helpful. How's everybody feeling about this right now? Concerned? Kind of okay? Understanding where it's coming from? Like where are we falling right now?
I guess I'll just add one other, kind of elephant in the room question, which is, is there any indication that this process is going to get slowed down due to the administration or anything like that? Just for us to be able to plan
Yep.
internally.
Yep, that's a great question. And we have been wondering too. So unofficially, but just based on my like knowledge of the landscape here, the previous Trump administration came after the Clean Water Act already, and undermined it a bit. And so stormwater people and water people are not feeling like we're on the chopping block again. It feels like it may be something that has already kind of been checked off the bucket list there. And so I do think that this will probably keep moving at the speed that EPA is moving under this administration. So it's possible that the actual permitting process itself could be slowed. As I said, I don't think we're going to hear back until summer because they're going to have to process a lot of comments. And then, once we hear back in summer, it could be, several years before any real like hard requirements have hit the property owners who received permits. So I do think that there's some time here to start planning and to start figuring this out. But I think just assume that things are moving at the speed of environmental regulated government right now. And that's a little bit slower than it was before, but still, moving along. Other questions, comments? I don't have a whole lot of financial info for you. I know I get that question a lot, like how much do you think it's going to cost us to like build a stormwater system if we don't have one? And I'm sorry that I don't have that right now. Costs have been coming in kind of all over the place and it really depends on your site. But we're here to support with like cost tools and green infrastructure costing tools and stuff like that. We've, happy to share with you whatever our office is currently using, which has been pretty accurate so far. And I think the city will probably be looking into like grants and other things, trying to figure out how do we get a little bit of money available for property owners who are going to be making physical changes. And so we'll keep everybody posted on what that looks like too. Okay. We are at 1:50, so I just want to really quickly, that's my information. Feel free to reach out at any time. The QR code, sorry, I leave that up there. It's just our social media. So like if you want to like check out what the office is doing on social media, but email address, website, all that stuff, we'll keep updating information here. And then we're doing an initiative right now, and Longwood is an area that I think would really benefit from some of the work that we're about to do. So City of Boston is trying to get a better sense of where we're currently experiencing flooding in the city. We have a pretty good idea from like a coastal perspective, just because we focus so much on coastal flooding, but we haven't spent as much time looking at inland flooding, which is like the Longwood medical area is the perfect example of like inland flooding. And so we've created a survey, which you're seeing just screenshots of on the screen right now. And what we're asking people to do is to submit survey results or survey responses, just letting us know like where you're seeing flooding, what kind of flooding are you seeing, how deep is it, like send us a photo. Like it's very simple. The whole survey takes like 2 minutes to submit. The QR code is there, but just occasionally, if people want to send in some information, we're also about to start working with universities and others to get college students out there doing some of this data collection as well. And then after we've done a bunch of data collection in June of this coming year, we are doing a huge assessment of where are we seeing the flooding and how is it affecting humans. And then we're going to start looking at siting green infrastructure. So it's going to inform where we're making capital investments and building new green infrastructure in the city. So the more responses that we get from your area, the more likely it is that you'll see your area come up on our capital project planning lists, just because, if we don't have a lot of data from people, we can't can't really plan super well. So just wanted to let you all know that this was happening. We've got a lot of community organizations that are involved in helping us do this data collection. The watershed associations, the Charles River, Mystic River, and Neponset River watershed associations are part of this project team as well. And again, the goal here is to just better understand what flooding looks like in Boston, not modeled flooding, but actual, like, how are people experiencing this kind of flooding? Okay. Thank you for letting me do my little plug. All right, so any other questions or anything in the last couple of minutes? I want to make sure that we get out anything. And there's no, like, we can also like pause the recording if you'd like to, if people want to ask questions you're like afraid to have recorded or just like don't want recorded, because I'm happy to answer stuff like that too.
Hey, Lisa here. Nice to see you.
Hi.
This maybe is a question for the group as well. Are there any known like collective comments coming in for different organizations to comment together?
Yeah, well, as far as I'm aware, there are lots of groups like this who are commenting together. So we've heard like Mattapan and other like the southern neighborhoods are doing collective comments. And then the city is putting in comments that we're trying to do citywide as much as we can. And that'll include things that we've heard from groups like Longwood Collective and others will reinforce or like strengthen what you're submitting as your concerns. Boston Water and Sewer is submitting one in collaboration with the MWRA. Who else? We've got a couple like people who do stormwater, like the consulting firms that do stormwater compliance. A lot of them are submitting comments as well. And they're submitting comments like on behalf of their clients, which are usually like people who are either already regulated or likely will be soon. So I think collective comments are helpful and like probably going to be pretty common.
And
And Lisa, I'll reiterate too that Longwood Collective will plan to send out comments on behalf of all of us as well.
awesome.
That's great.
And can you just remind me what's the time schedule for commenting to the EPA?
Yep, the deadline is March 17th, and it was actually January 19th or something, and they extended it 2 months. Partially, I think because people had indicated that a January comment deadline is horrible because everybody was away for the holidays, but also I think because people needed a little bit more time with the resources that were sent out, because they did send out a lot of resources. All right, Abby, I'm happy to turn it back to you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks all for joining. I'll make sure that Kate and I coordinate to get you all of the information that we talked about, the slides. I'll send out the recording as well, the fact sheet, all of the flood details. So you'll have that. And I think I said this at the beginning, but for anyone that wasn't here right when we started, feel free to send out this recording to any of your colleagues as well that might have missed this and are interested in it. So we'll keep in touch on this and collect comments as we go over the next month to make sure we get that submitted on behalf of the group as well. Thank you
Awesome.
all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.